Chevre, how are you? A freilichen Chodesh, a guten Chodesh, a tzlachetigen Chodesh. Today is Reish Chodesh Sivan, one of the most important, monumental, epic days in the Jewish calendar. Before we start, as we've done in the last couple of months, we start with Tzedakah, G'deilet Tzedakah Shem HaKarevis HaGeula. The war should end now, Mashiach should come now. If I forgot to mention before, how are you? I hope everyone is gesund, stark, und freilich, begashmis und beruchnis. I hope everyone is healthy, strong, and happy physically and spiritually. Next we go to a prayer. Today we'll start with the prayer, Hareini mekabel olai mitzasei shel v'ahavta l'reacha kamoicha. I hereby accept upon myself to fulfill the commandment of loving your fellow as yourself. So, today is Erev Shabbos Kodesh Parshas Bamidbar. We start in Chumash. It's Rosh Chodesh Sivan, as we mentioned before. And this week, there was very, very sad news in Lubavitch. One of the greatest chassidim of our era and our times, Reb Moshe Kotlarsky, who was the heart and soul of the whole Shluchim movement, passed away. And we'll speak today, Mirz Hashem, the connection between all these things. But first, let's start with the day, Reish Chodesh Sivan, and why it's so important. What happened on Reish Chodesh Sivan? Bayei Mazeh Bo Midbar Sinai. The Torah makes an announcement, headlines. Bayei Mazeh Bo Midbar Sinai. Today we arrived at Sinai. And as we know from what we say in the Agada, Ilur kevanu l'fnei Sinai, v'lei nasan lanu es haTorah, dayenu. Even if Hashem would have just brought us to Sinai and not given us the Torah, it would have been enough. What sort of astounding, astonishing statement is that? Just by bringing us to Sinai without giving us the Torah is the whole basis of everything. It would have been enough. How can we say that? So there's many answers to that question, and one answer is, since the whole purpose of the Torah is v'ahavta l'reacha kamoicha, zeh kal gadol b'Torah, and we know that this is, whatever the explanation should be, maybe we'll get into it. So what happened at Sinai? Everyone knows the famous pasuk where it says vayisu mefidim. They traveled from Mefidim, vayevoyu midbar Sinai. They came to Sinai. Vayachnu Bamidbar, vayichan sham Yisrael neged ahor. It says vayichan sham, he camped there, not they. And Rashi says, ki ish echad b'leiv echad, as one person with one heart. So we achieved a unity between ourselves, a sense of brotherhood and love that was never achieved before. And in a certain sense, since that's the whole purpose of the entire Torah, therefore, Ilur kevanu l'fnei Sinai, and we did reach that state of ki ish echad b'leiv echad. For that itself, it's enough. We already achieved the ultimate, what Torah demands from us, and what the Torah is all about. That's one explanation. So we see from this pasuk that today, Reish Chodesh Sivan, is one of the greatest days in the history of Yiddishkeit. The Torah makes that announcement because this is what the whole purpose of Yetzias Mitzrayim was all about. That's why the pasuk makes such an announcement. It was headlines, the excitement of the Yidden when it was B'yoi Mazeh Bo Midbar Sinai. Finally, we got to the place where we're going to get the Torah. They knew that over here is going to be Matan Torah, but Yetzias Mitzrayim, Tavnas Elikim, the whole purpose of Yetzias Mitzrayim in the first place was to come to Matan Torah, and this was the preparation of the 49 days of cleansing and working on themselves, inner character development, and finally, they knew we reached Sinai and we're going to receive the Torah. So that's the importance of Reish Chodesh Sivan. We may speak about this more later, but first let's go to Parshas Bamidbar and the beginning of the new Sefer Bamidbar. And what does the Parsha talk about? A census, counting. And Rashi says over here, because Hashem loves, cherishes the Yidden, He counts them at all times. So this sefer, the literal translation of this sefer, Bamidbar, means a desert. But Bamidbar is also called in Razal Sefer Apkudim, the book of counting. That's why in English they translated Bamidbar numbers. So Chassidus talks about this idea. What does it mean? Mitoichi boson lefonov moina isum kol shah. What does that mean? So a simple analogy is like, you have, when you were a kid, you had marbles, and you used to always count your marbles, or your Matchbox cars, or your Hot Wheels. I forgot what they were called exactly. You had that container, that box. You put them in the box, you unpack the box, you pour them all out every Shabbos or whatever it was, or your toy soldiers. You'd count them, you'd set them up, how many ambulances you have, how many school buses you have, how many police cars you have. You loved it, you never tired of it, and you kept on doing it. So too, mitechi basan lefonav moina yisum kolsha. Fine, but really, what's the theme over here? What's the idea? What's the lesson? What about the concept of counting itself? It doesn't sound so profound. And what do we gain out of it? What are we celebrating? So this is the point. The Rebbe explains in many places the idea of counting. And there's different sort of countings, and there's the chiddush of the counting of Bamidbar. And the truth is, this fits in with the Rebbe's many talks about the two elements. There's the individual and there's the collective. And this is in many areas. Klal uprat. Sometimes you can call it in Avodas Hashem. There's bittul, that the person has to nullify himself, surrender, obedience. And then there's yichud, the way he makes of himself, taking his personal qualities and channeling those particular qualities that he has to serve Hashem. So those are two different strands, and we've spoken about it many times, and how it manifests itself in many areas of Yiddishkeit. And I would say in the Rebbe's Torah, more than any other great leader, there was this talk of the paradox of the individual and his identity and his existence, his metzius, and also his non-existence, his bittul. So let's talk about counting. And let's talk about Avos Yisrael, since the whole point of today, Rosh Chodesh Sivan, is Ki Ish Echad B'Leiv Echad. Let's start with Avos Yisrael, and then we'll show how this also manifests itself in the concept of counting. So first of all, about Avos Yisrael, the Rebbe explains in different places the two ways how you can have Avos Yisrael to another person. There's one Avos Yisrael mitzad etzem. As we said many times in the story, you Jew, me Jew. You look at the next Jew, you don't see what is distinctive about him and what makes him different, but you see him as a Jew. Was mir seine mir, aber in seine mir. That's it. You Jew, me Jew. And in that sense, we're all equal. What unites us is far greater than what divides us. Achem anachnu, we're brothers, and therefore we're one. And in the body, the analogy for this would be that when you look at your body and you understand what is a complete body, a Muslim, a complete body means you have Ramach Evarim, Mishas Hagidim. You have 248 limbs. Now, we're not discussing the unique, particular function of a limb. We say like this: what is a Muslim? Ramach Evarim. And if you're missing one of those Ramach Evarim, then you're not complete, you're incomplete. It doesn't make a difference if one is vital and without it you wouldn't be able to live, and one is not necessarily vital. But the fact is, if you don't have that limb, you're not complete. In other words, if you believe in the organic, if the Eibishter created a body and you have an appendix, that means the appendix is important for the perfection of a whole, complete, shleimus body. And if you don't have an appendix, you're incomplete. And that's why when it comes to a kohen, it could be a problem serving in the Beis HaMikdash. So, do we understand exactly what the function of the appendix is? Not necessarily. But the fact is, to be a complete shleimus mino anushi, you need an appendix, just like you need a brain, just like you need eyeballs, just like you need fingers. Everything is part of the whole. And if you're missing one, it's not whole. Then we come to another point. So 1 second, let's go an analogy for this. We have a jigsaw puzzle. That's a good example. We spoke about this many times. So when we talk about a jigsaw puzzle, it doesn't make a difference the size or the shape of one particular piece. If we're missing that piece, the puzzle is incomplete. It doesn't make a difference how big that piece is or how small that piece is. We need that piece. That's number one. Okay. Then we have another aspect, how we come to unite the body as one unit. And that is, not only do we say that every single limb creates a whole body, but we speak about another point. Every single limb has its unique contribution. The feet without the head wouldn't know where to go. The head without the feet wouldn't be able to go. So in other words, each part of the body has to look at another part of the body and say, in a certain sense, that part of the body is a head. It's a leader in its thing. And the same thing is the Gabba Klal Yisrael. It's not only that we're all one body, because without one we'd be incomplete, but we need every single individual as an individual with its unique talents, because every single person accomplishes something different and brings something different to the table. And that's the same thing in an army, for example. We've spoken about this many times. There's one idea that everyone's a soldier, and that's the main point, because it shows a willingness for self-sacrifice, to give away your whole life, and to put your life on the line, etc., etc. So the klal, the nation, comes before you. And that's the greatest thing. Parshas, selflessness, total, and to pay the ultimate price. But the truth is, when you join the army, we want to take a psych test, a physical test, whatever it is, and to see where you fit in more than anyone else, or different than everyone else. We need pilots, we need deep sea divers, we need snipers, we need jeep drivers, we need cooks, we need maintenance, we need everyone. You know, they say the story of the Rebbe, that once he was, the famous story of the coach, who used to be a coach for the Harlem Globetrotters. And he was standing in front of 770 and he told the Rebbe that he's a coach. And the Rebbe said, that's what I need. I need a coach. In other words, in the Rebbe's worldview, Nasi, he sees the way every single Yid is a part of the whole. But more than that, he sees how I need a coach. The Eibishter needs a coach. The Jewish nation needs a coach. Right now, until now, we didn't have a coach who was spreading the message. Vayikra Hashem Keilelam. We didn't have a coach yet who was spreading the message of Hashem Echad. And now I need a coach. So we see from this, there's two ways to look at every Yid. Number one, there's the Ava Atzmis, the essential love. You Jew, me Jew. And that's one way. But then there's another way to see him as an individual. And to see his particular contribution. And the truth is, I'm not going to elaborate now, but you need both in order to treat the other person properly. So now let's go to counting. There's two ways of counting, and there's two messages in counting. There's one message of counting where everyone is the same. So it speaks about the universal message. There's no difference one from the other. Everyone is a one. And therefore, it shows an achdus. Because no one is special than the other. Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't count more than Bedel Shmerel. So they're all the same. That's one level of counting. That's the Ava Atzmis, the essential love, which is the foundation of the mitzvah of Avos Yisrael, which we don't look at the specifics of the other person. We see him as a soul, a neshama, a pintel yid. But then there's another aspect of Avos Yisrael, where Moshe Rabbeinu looks at an ish poshet and says, I need him because he has a certain maila, a certain advantage, a certain superiority that I don't have. That's a counting, and this is the chiddush of this week's parsha. It's a counting where it says, L'mishpechoisam leveis avoisam. It was a counting where we counted the tribes. That means we're already making some distinctions between tribes. L'mishpechoisam leveis avoisam, according to the families, according to the father's house. B'mispar shemais, we mentioned their name. The names is their individuality, their soul, their particular soul. Number 4669, with their name. The name shows an affection. Like we see in the beginning of Vayikra, where there was a Kriya Shel Chibur from the Eibishter to Moshe Rabbeinu, and Hashem would say, Moshe, Moshe. Anybody who knows about relationships, you have a teacher, he has 70 students, imagine. Sometimes they don't always know the first names. I admit, I have that problem, I forget the first names. But I do know that I have to work on it and try to remember the first names. The feeling of the person when you say his first name lifts him up, and it creates a bond and a connection. Like nothing else, even though it's a simple thing, it seems very external. It seems very shallow. But no! You call a person by his name, his first name especially, this immediately creates a level of intimacy. And this is what it says over here, individuality. And this is what it says over here, L'mishpachaysam leveis avoisam b'mispar shemes. So over here, in this week's Parsha, the Chiddush of the counting and the message in the celebration is not only celebrating the Jewish nation as a nation, but celebrating the Jewish nation as unbelievable individual heroes, unbelievable individual champions, every single one, every single Yid, for his individual quality that he brings to the table that nobody else does. And that's the Chiddush of the counting. And this is what it means over here. Counting in general shows on a preciousness. Number one, on the collective idea, that he loves the Eden so much that he counts them because they're precious. But then there's also a counting, we don't only count them to create a collective, a nation, but we're counting the individual. And we're looking at the individual, and we see his quality as an individual. And that's the chiddush of the counting of Parshas Bamidbar. And this is what we have to have in mind today when we're talking about Rosh Chodesh Sivan, and we're going to Matan Torah. And there's nothing that Hashem loves as much as to see how we're united. And I'm making a resolution to myself to work on both of these areas of Avos Yisrael to see the klal another year as a neshama, as the Alter Rebbe explains in chapter 32, that this is the only way to come to true love of another Yid. But even more than that, to see him not as an equal, and we're all equals, let's say, because we all have a neshama, but even more than that, he's better than me, he's higher than me, he brings something to the table, he serves the Jewish nation in a way that I can't, and that only he can. This is also the connection to the Pirkei Avos that we're learning this week. I once heard a Meir the Kavart. In Perek Vav of Pirkei Avos, the first Mishnah says that whoever learns Torah Lishma merits many things. And then it says, one of the things, Nikra Rea, he's called a friend, of beloved, Oyeves HaMokim, Oyeves HaBrias, he loves Hashem and he loves creations, Misameach HaSamokim, Misameach HaSabrias. You can cry just reading this. He brings joy to the Eibush, he brings joy to others. Here you see a clear source. Daf Machem Freilich nach Ayiden. It's a mission. Bring joy to another Jew. It's a mission. So you're learning this mission, you think to yourself, the person who's learning Torah Lishma, Nikra Goyen, he should be called a Torah genius. Nikra Landen, Nikra Chochem, Nikra Talmud Chochem, Nikra Amkin, Nikra Maven. We should say the person who learns Torah Lishma is called a Torah genius, a deep thinker, a great scholar. No, what's he called? Rea, friend, of beloved, Oyeves HaMokim. He loves the Eibishter, Oyeves HaBrias. We're talking about a man with heart. Misameach HaMokim, Misameach HaBrias. Wow. And the word is, Torah is about Avos Yisrael. Torah is about Midas Tevis. If your Torah doesn't go hand in hand with you being a warm person whose interest is in others and to bring benefit for others, then that's a sign you're not somebody who is Eisig B'Torah L'Shma. I don't know what you're doing. You're studying, you're reading a book, you're spending a lot of time over the Sefer, but you ain't that person who's Eisig B'Torah L'Shma. Because if you were that person that was Eisig B'Torah L'Shma, you'd be called a friend. You'd be called beloved. You'd be called somebody who's M'sameach es hamokim, M'sameach es habriyos. I don't remember the last time I heard somebody talking about some person, some Rosh Hashiva, and was saying, you know what made this Rosh Hashiva great? He was M'sameach es hamokim, M'sameach es habriyos. Or he's called Reya. And this is what we see has to be the introduction, the preparation to Matan Torah is every time we're learning Torah, Machlekes, Rashi, and Tosfos, whatever it is, the Turim Beis Yosef, everything we're learning in Torah, we have to understand, Sof Kol Sof, Torah Milosh Naira, it was meant to make me a better person in Midas Tovos. And if it doesn't, that means there's something wrong with my Torah. Which brings us to Rabbi Moshe Kotlarsky, who passed away this week. I cannot tell you how many stories that I'm hearing from my own Dalar Amis about his chesed. He is Nikra Ov. He was Reya. He was the friend of all the Shluchim. There's a global movement, Chabad, the Rebbe sent Shluchim to elevate the world. But there was one man in Merkaz. There was one person who the Shluchim worldwide to turn to if they ever needed help. There was one person who was interested in every single shliach and what's doing with his life, what's doing with his family's life, what's doing with his physical life. He was the person who, if a shliach came to New York, he'd say, Rabbi Yaakov, what's machst du? What's going on in Melbourne? Send regards to that person. He had an ear for every single shliach. There's not going to be another Moshe Kotlarsky. Reb Moshe Kotlarsky. Parshas, somebody who mamish did chesed. Just to tell you from my small world, I was a bacher, a shliach in California in 1980, from 1981 summer till the summer of 83. One day there was another bacher, a student, probably a bit younger than me, who my Rosh Hashiva told me, Rabbi Ezer Shachet, you should learn with this bacher. Rabbi Moshe Kotlarsky wants you to learn with this bacher. Something like that. So I called this person this week to remember, that I got it right, So I called this person. I'm not going to say his name. He tells me he met Rabbi Moshe Kotlarsky in Cleveland. Rabbi Moshe Kotlarsky went to Cleveland for a simcha. He has a brother-in-law in Cleveland, Rabbi Alesky, who's the shliach there. They made a simcha. So Rabbi Moshe Kotlarsky went there, and this bacher was out of yeshiva. He was an Israeli. He was out of yeshiva. He was working at a pizza shop, but he was a chassidish bacher. He had the right spirit. He liked to daven. Anyways, Moshe Kotlarsky went there for a simcha on Shabbos, and he noticed this bacher, and they got into a conversation. And he tells him he's working in a pizza shop, during the week, etc. To make a long story short, the bacher decided he wants to quit his pizza shop. He wants to go learn in yeshiva. But he's not really ready to sit a whole day in yeshiva. It's hard for him. So he wanted to divide time learning in yeshiva and doing miftzayim. He calls Moshe Kotlarsky. He says he wants to leave the pizza. What should he do? Moshe Kotlarsky says, go to California. He listened to Moshe Kotlarsky. He flew to California from Cleveland. He lands in California. He calls Moshe Kotlarsky. This person told me in those days, you didn't have no mobile phones. He's by the payphone. He calls Moshe Kotlarsky. I'm in California. I landed. What should I do? And Moshe Kotlarsky says, go to the yeshiva in California and tell them you want to learn Torah part of the day. Anyways, at first they didn't know who this person is. and without any tuition and fees and nothing. You just want to learn and set up a chavrusa. It's not so simple. Anyways, he called Moshe Kotlarsky again and told him he's having a bit of a hard time to be able to arrange a chavrusa and sit and learn. Rabbi Kotlarsky said, no worries. It seems that Rabbi Kotlarsky called Rabbi Kunyan. Rabbi Kunyan called the Hanhola in California. The next thing I know, the Hanhola comes over to me. I was a shliach. It says, could you learn with this bacher? I used to learn with him every day for Chassidus for an hour in the morning and then an hour of Nigla, the first hour of Nigla. So here is a Moshe Kotlarsky sticking out his neck. He's running the whole shlichus of the whole world in charge. And there's a bacher, a single bacher, who's at that time, 19 years old, who's giving him calls from Cleveland, from California. And Moshe Kotlarsky is arranging that this Israeli bacher, who's in America without parents, and he arranges for him to be able to sit and learn in yeshiva. And the rest of the day, he went on Mivtzoyim. He helped the shlich in California doing Mivtzoyim. That's just one story where we see how Moshe Kotlarsky is a friend. Chesed, an open house. He lived modestly. And he's doing, I cannot tell you, now's not the time or the scope to tell you stories upon stories. Last night there was a Farbrengen in Yeshiva Gedel in Melbourne. After the Farbrengen, I was talking about, the latest news of Moshe Kotlarsky. And then we're talking about how he helped Shluchim. So he tells me that this year, he sent an email to the Moshe Kotlarsky to tell him that he's making a chasna. He already made one chasna this year, and he doesn't have money. It's very difficult for him. And he's now making a second chasna. This is a Malamed in Melbourne, Australia. Not a famous last name. Most of you who I'm talking to over here wouldn't even know that this person exists. And it's not somebody who has any connection to Rabbi Moshe Kotlarsky. He sent him an email, and Rabbi Kotlarsky arranged for this person to get a couple of $1,000 this year. Baruch Hashem. And I was thinking to myself, if this is somebody who doesn't even know Rabbi Moshe Kotlarsky, and he calls him up and Moshe does him a favor, Mamish Chesed, how many calls is he getting a week from people that know him? Who knows? And I thought that this fund to help shluchim for simchas, bar mitzvahs, and chasnas wasn't really on anymore. Anyways, but here you go. I didn't know it, and I mentioned to this person about Rabbi Moshe Kotlarsky, and he tells me this story straight off the bat last night. So we should all be inspired to be such a person, to be misameach others, like it says in this Mishnah, to be able to think, are you someone who people will call a friend? Everyone should be able to be called a friend. Then you're a true, authentic, real chassid who does chesed. The word chassid comes from the word chesed. And it's all about Avos Yisrael, as we see today in Rosh Chodesh Sivan. Ilu kervonu lefnei Sinai, v'lei nasan lanu es haTorah, dayenu. The Eibusher should help, that we should all work on our Avos Yisrael, and there's no question about it, that if each and every single one of us will work on our Avos Yisrael, U'B'Cheinu Avinu, Kulanu Ke'echad, this will bring the Gula Mitzvah Shlema, take it from a yad, mamish. I just want to mention the Yom Yom of Rosh Chodesh Sivan. See there, and it speaks about how every single person, a child, has in him powerful connections to his roots. And this is also the connection to the Parsha, Lemishbechoisam Leveis Avoisam, that we're not only talking about the Jew as someone who is a Jew, but his individuality. And this is also another very important point, to remember this Hayom Yom. And when you read this Hayom Yom, where he says that everyone will return to their roots, that means that not only do we say, no matter where you will roam, you can always come back home. We could say, no matter where you may roam, you will come back home. And it starts by each and every single one of us seeing the other person with that powerful yearning and longing of his neshama to reconnect. So let's all reach out and try to ignite that part of the other person that wants to be connected. Tell that person that he's the piece of the puzzle which has its own unique shape, which only he could fill that slot, and no one else could fill that slot. And the Eibusher should help that we'll all treat each other in such a way, like Rabbi Moshe Kotlarski did, looking out for everyone else, caring for everyone else, and being everyone's friend. This will bring about the Gula Mitzvah Shlema, take it from Yad Mamish, posting from my home, Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, your man in Melbourne.